the sun was merciless that afternoon, bleaching the horizon, burning through my skin, and blurring the world into waves of gold. I remember watching the dust rise behind their car as it disappeared, the echo of the tires fading until there was nothing but wind and silence. My mouth was dry, my heart hollow. That's how betrayal sounds, not like shouting, but like a door closing for the last time. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because trust me, betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it's the people who share your blood. That was the moment I realized I wasn't supposed to survive. Let me show you how I did. The first thing I remember is the sound of gravel crunching under the tires, the car pulling away, growing smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a gray blur against the burning horizon. The air was dry, almost metallic, and the heat shimmered off the asphalt like a cruel mirage. I stood there, one hand shielding my eyes, watching as the people I trusted most, my own daughter and her husband, drove off and left me in the middle of nowhere. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. There was no wind, no birds, just the faint ringing in my ears and the echo of disbelief in my chest. For a long moment, I couldn't even cry. It felt like my mind had shut down, refusing to believe what my eyes had just seen. I had always imagined betrayal as something loud, shouted words, slammed doors, angry tears, but this was different. It was quiet, cold, the kind of betrayal that doesn't scream, it whispers as it leaves you behind. The sun pressed down hard, and the sand began to sting against my ankles. I thought about my daughter's face earlier that morning, the way she smiled as she told me to trust her. I wanted to believe that smile. I had to. After all, she was my child. I looked down at the dust-covered road stretching endlessly in both directions. For the first time, I realized no one was coming back for me. My heart broke in a way I didn't know was possible, but somewhere inside that pain, something else began to stir. Something steady, something strong. They thought I was helpless. They were wrong. When I think back to how it all began, it almost feels like a dream. A warm, familiar one that turned sour before I even realized it. Standing in that desert, watching the road disappear, my mind drifted to the life I had before everything changed. For most of my adult life, I lived in a quiet house on the edge of Denver with my husband, Thomas Reed. He was a gentle man, steady and kind, the sort who always remembered to bring home fresh flowers on Fridays and left handwritten notes on the kitchen table. We built a life filled with small, ordinary joys. Morning coffee on the porch, reading by the fire, tending to the rose bushes out back. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. It was ours. When Thomas passed away, it felt as if the house itself exhaled and went silent. The walls that had once held laughter seemed to echo with absence. For months, I barely spoke to anyone. I drifted through my days like a shadow, surviving, but not really living. That's when Emily called. My daughter's voice had always been distant, measured, polite. But that day, it carried a gentleness I hadn't heard in years. She said she wanted to visit, to take care of me for a while, and to introduce me to her new husband, Jason. I remember crying after that call, thinking maybe this was a second chance for us. When they arrived, Emily looked radiant, confident in a way that both comforted and intimidated me. Jason, with his easy smile and smooth charm, made me feel instantly at ease. He called me Mom by the second day, helped around the house, and said things like, "You shouldn't be worrying about bills or repairs at your age." I thought it was kindness. I wanted to believe it was kindness. They began handling small things at first: bank statements, insurance forms, the property taxes Thomas used to manage. Jason said he was just simplifying things. Emily encouraged me to rest, to stop worrying, to trust them. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the Rockies, feeling almost grateful that life was beginning to feel safe again. Looking back, I can see all the signs, the too sweet reassurances, the sudden eagerness to help, the way they flinched when I asked about details. But grief has a way of softening your judgment. It makes you see what you wish were true, not what's real. It was Jason who came up with the idea of the trip. He said it softly one evening, while we were sitting in the living room, the television humming faintly in the background. He suggested we visit the Southwest, the same landscapes my late husband, Thomas, had always dreamed of exploring, but never got the chance to. Jason called it a healing trip, a way for the three of us to start fresh. The idea touched me deeply. For the first time in months, I felt something close to excitement. I imagined the open desert skies, the quiet red canyons, and maybe even a bit of peace after all the grief. Emily smiled in agreement, though her eyes looked distant, as if she was smiling more for him than for me. Still, I wanted to believe it was genuine. I needed to believe it. The following days were filled with small, tender moments. We packed bags together, sorted through Thomas's old maps, and talked about the places we would see. Jason handled the travel plans. He said he had everything under control. I remember feeling relieved, thinking how kind it was of him to take care of it all. He even said Thomas would be proud of us for doing this. That line alone was enough to quiet the unease that sometimes crept into my thoughts. There were moments, though, fleeting, but sharp, when I noticed little things that didn't quite fit. Jason asked casual questions about the house deed and whether I had updated the will since Thomas passed. Emily brushed it off when I looked at her, saying it was just practical talk. And yet, her hands trembled when she poured her coffee. I felt a flicker of something I couldn't name. Unease. Maybe. A whisper at the edge of my mind telling me to pay attention. But then I'd remind myself that they were my family, my daughter, my only child. How could I think such things? So, I ignored the feeling. I told myself that love could rebuild what time and distance had broken, that this trip was exactly what we needed to find our way back to each other. If only I'd listened to that quiet voice inside me. If only I'd known that the road we were about to take wasn't leading toward healing, but toward the most painful truth of my life. The moment felt ordinary at first. The car slowed to a stop in the middle of the desert, the air outside trembling with heat. Jason said there was something wrong with the engine. I remember the way the sunlight cut through the windshield, sharp and golden, how the air inside the car felt too still. He stepped out, popped the hood, and waved for Emily to join him. I sat quietly, watching them through the glass, their figures blurred by the glare. Then, without warning, they got back in. I caught Emily's eyes through the window, just for a second. There was something there, something fragile and final. Before I could move, the door shut. The engine roared back to life, and the car rolled forward. At first, I thought they were just circling back. Maybe Jason was testing something. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But the sound of the tires faded fast. Too fast. I stood there in the silence, waiting, my heart pounding against the stillness. The desert was endless. The sky pressed down like a weight, and the air shimmered with heat. I could feel the sun burning the back of my neck, the dryness catching in my throat. I turned in circles, scanning the horizon for movement, for a sign of life. There was nothing, just sand, light, and the faint echo of an engine disappearing into the distance. I don't know how long I stood there before I understood. The realization didn't come like a scream. It arrived like a whisper, heavy and absolute. They had left me. My daughter, my only child, had left me to die. The shock was numbing at first, then sharp enough to make me tremble. I thought of the house in Denver, of Thomas's laugh, of Emily as a child with her small hand in mine. I felt the grief and disbelief mix until it became something colder. Clarity. I sank to my knees, hands pressed into the hot dirt. The world was quiet, but inside me, something shifted. A stillness settled where panic had been. I looked at the empty road and knew one thing with certainty. They thought I would die out here. But they underestimated me. The first hours after they left blurred together. The sun hung heavy above me, so close it felt like it could burn through my skin. My lips cracked. My vision swayed. Every instinct screamed to move, to run after the car. But my body knew better. Panic would waste what little strength I had left. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I checked what I had: half a bottle of water, a few granola bars, my handbag, and the clothes on my back. That was it. The heat shimmered off the road like liquid glass, and every step felt like walking through fire. Somewhere deep inside, I heard Thomas's voice, the calm, steady tone he used whenever life fell apart. He used to say, survival isn't about strength, it's about focus. I clung to that. I found a thin strip of shade under a rock formation and waited. The air cooled slightly as the sun lowered, and I rationed my sips of water, counting each one as if it were time itself. When night came, the desert changed. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive. Stars spilled across the sky like tiny lanterns, and I began walking, slow and steady, tracing faint road markings. My mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for years. I wasn't thinking about death anymore. I was thinking about life, about how fiercely I still wanted it. Hours passed before I saw it, a dark shape against the horizon. A structure, maybe. My legs shook as I approached, each step heavier than the last. It was an old water pump near a crumbling shack. The metal handle groaned, but when I pushed, a trickle of water fell into my hand. I wept quietly, drinking until my body steadied again. That's when I met him. Samir, a traveler, maybe in his 40s, kind eyes and sun-worn skin. He found me slumped near the pump and gave me shelter in his small outpost. I remember the taste of real water, the sound of a voice that held no deceit. He didn't ask for details. He just helped. That small kindness, after all the cruelty, reminded me that not everyone takes. Some still give. By morning, my body was weak, but my spirit was unrecognizable. The woman who had entered the desert in shock was gone. In her place stood someone raw, sharpened by betrayal and silence. Before I left, I carved my initials into the side of the pump, a quiet proof that I survived. They thought they buried me out there, under sun and dust. But I walked out alive, and I wasn't done yet. When they found me, I was half conscious, skin cracked from the sun, lips bleeding, heartbeat slow, but steady. The sound of the helicopter blades was the first human noise I'd heard in days. I remember the paramedic's face leaning over mine, the smell of antiseptic, the way the hospital lights stung my eyes. Survival felt unreal, like waking up from a fever dream. But deep down, I knew I hadn't been rescued by luck. I had saved myself. The days that followed were quiet. I spoke little, ate slowly, and listened. Every sound, the beeping monitors, the nurse's footsteps, felt like proof of life. When they asked what had happened, I told them I'd gotten lost during a solo trip. No drama, no names. I wasn't ready to tell the truth. Not yet. As my body healed, my mind sharpened. I spent my recovery planning, not remembering. On the third day, I called my lawyer, then the bank, then a private investigator I'd used years ago after a minor real estate issue. My voice was steady, my instructions precise. I didn't tremble when I asked for financial records, property transfers, or access to Thomas's estate. Every word I spoke drew me further from the woman they had abandoned and closer to the one I was becoming. The investigator confirmed what I already suspected. Emily and Jason had filed a missing person report within 48 hours of my disappearance. Not out of concern, but to trigger an early inheritance clause. They'd already started liquidating assets under my name. What they didn't know was that Thomas had anticipated betrayal. His will included a safeguard, a clause freezing all accounts if fraud or manipulation was suspected. All it took was one call from me to lock every dollar, every property, every trust. In the eyes of the law, their plan had collapsed before it even began. That night, I sat by the hospital window, phone in hand. The city lights below looked small and far away. I dialed Emily's number and waited. When she answered, I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I just said I was alive. The silence that followed was long and heavy, enough to let her understand everything without another word. When I hung up, I felt no rage, no sorrow, only clarity. That was the night I decided I'd teach them both what real loss feels like. When I finally returned home, the air felt different, thicker somehow, heavy with memory and guilt. The house was exactly as I had left it, except for the smell of new paint and something else beneath it. Fear. The door opened before I could knock. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, pale as chalk. Jason a step behind her, his confidence cracked. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence was louder than any scream could have been. I stepped inside, my footsteps soft against the hardwood floor Thomas had once polished himself. Every picture on the wall told a story. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, a lifetime of love I had built and they had traded for greed. I could see the realization flicker in Emily's eyes. Her mother was no ghost. I was alive, standing in the wreckage they had made. I began to speak slowly, each word chosen like a stone placed on a grave. I told them about the desert, The heat, the silence, the way the air burned my lungs when they drove away. I described how I waited, thinking it was a mistake, until I understood. I didn't accuse. I simply remembered aloud. Each memory cut deeper than accusation ever could. Jason shifted, trying to look anywhere but at me. Emily's eyes filled, but she didn't move closer. I told them I had survived, that I had walked through that desert with nothing but the memory of Thomas's voice guiding me. I said their names quietly, and I watched their faces fall when they realized I knew everything. About the inheritance, the false report, the accounts they had tried to move. I had already undone it all. Every cent frozen, every asset protected, every lie documented. But this confrontation wasn't about punishment. I wanted them to see what betrayal costs. I told Emily that I wasn't there to destroy her. I had already done the only thing that mattered. I lived. And now she would live with that truth every day, that she had failed to kill the one person who loved her most. The air in the room grew still again. I looked at the daughter I once held as a baby and felt a pain deeper than anger, a hollow grief that had no tears left to give. I told her I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I refused to let her poison stay inside me. When I turned to leave, Jason said something, muffled, defensive, but I didn't hear it. My focus was on the door, on the sunlight spilling through the window. I stepped outside, feeling the wind on my skin, and for the first time since that day in the desert, I felt free. Behind me, the house stood quiet. I didn't need to look back. They already knew what came next. In the weeks that followed, the truth spread like ripples in still water. I didn't have to say much. People saw what they needed to see. The story of my disappearance, the missing person report, the sudden miracle of my return, it all became the quiet talk of the community. Emily and Jason tried to explain, to twist it into confusion, but the facts were already laid bare. The police called it attempted fraud. The banks froze what remained. Their friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. The world they'd built on lies collapsed under its own weight. I didn't watch it happen closely. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in whispers and paperwork. My lawyer handled the estate changes. Their names were removed from the will, their access permanently revoked. The money they wanted so desperately would now go to scholarships for widowed women rebuilding their lives. A cause Thomas would have loved. I found myself walking through the garden one morning. The same garden Thomas had planted when we first moved into that house. I decided to sell the place soon after. It had become a museum of memories, and I no longer needed to live among ghosts. On my last day there, I planted one final tree near the edge of the yard, a young oak. I pressed my palm to the soil and whispered a quiet goodbye, not to the house, but to the version of myself who had lived in fear, in longing, in blindness. Emily reached out once, a short message full of excuses, regret, and things left unsaid. I read it, then deleted it. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always mean reconciliation. It means letting go of the weight that isn't yours to carry anymore. I've learned that betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. It shows what you're made of when everything safe is stripped away. For me, It revealed strength I didn't know I had. It gave me clarity, compassion, and a freedom that feels cleaner than anger ever could. Now, when I think of that desert, I don't see the place where they left me. I see the place where I was reborn, the place where I learned that even in the most barren of places, something new can grow. Have you ever faced betrayal that changed you forever? Tell me your story. I read every one. Some evenings, I sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the light fade over the hills. The world feels softer now, quieter, calmer. Sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees, I think about everything that happened, not with anger or sorrow, but with a kind of distant gratitude. Pain has a way of refining you. If you let it, it burns away the illusions until all that's left is truth. Betrayal, I've learned, doesn't always come from enemies. It often comes from the people you love the most, because they're the ones close enough to reach your heart. For a long time, I thought that kind of pain would destroy me, but it didn't. It showed me the strength I never knew I had, the kind that isn't loud or dramatic, but steady and enduring, like the desert itself. Forgiveness came slowly. It wasn't about them. It was about me. Holding on to anger felt like dragging a heavy chain behind me. And one day, I just decided to set it down. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting or excusing what they did. It meant choosing peace over bitterness. It meant giving myself permission to move forward without carrying their darkness with me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can lose everything: money, trust, even family, and still come back to yourself. The human heart is built to heal, even when it feels shattered beyond repair. What matters is that you don't let betrayal define you. You let it teach you. You let it shape the person you were always meant to become. And maybe, in the quiet hours of your own life, you'll realize that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others. It's the key that finally sets you free. Have you ever had to forgive someone who broke you? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.